So today I've got a game called Blacksea Odyssey that I've actually had on my shelf, brand new and sealed, for quite a while now. I've got to say maybe 2 or 3 years. So figured now's the time, maybe I'll just open it up and take a look and see what sort of a game it is. So it comes in a pretty standard collector's edition box. The one thing I hate about these is trying to get the top open. It feels like I always have to bend the cardboard really horribly and it leaves a mark. But yep, after getting in here, let's take a look at what we've got inside. So of course here's the game, which I've noticed has slightly different, well no, completely different cover art to the actual box. Still doesn't tell me too much about it. It looks like some kind of space shooter from the back here. And also in here we have a soundtrack on CD. I doubt I'll end up taking this out of the plastic wrap. I don't see myself playing the Blacksea Odyssey soundtrack anytime soon. Yeah, and especially when each track is only 1 minute long, but there's nothing wrong with extra stuff. I'm happy enough with that. And only other thing left in here is this card, which... okay, so I have copy number 65 out of just 1,500. So just 1,500 physical editions of this game produced. I think that's everything in here now. Yep, that is an empty box, alright. I don't really know what much to expect from Blacksea Odyssey. I know it's roguelike, and it looks like a kind of indie-style shooter. But let's pop it into the PS4 and see what we get.
A vast chasm exists between space and time. Here, the greatest huntsman in the universe is decided. Every decade, the competition returns. 4 challengers embark on a journey deep into the abyss.
This opening cutscene that we start with doesn't seem to explain much of anything, and is so incredibly brief that it may as well not exist at all. There's not a massive number of options to start with. You get 1 character to pick from, and 1 weapon to choose from as well. So you can unlock more as you progress along the game and achieve certain objectives. But this is what we're going to be starting with because there's not much more of a choice. And pretty strangely for a modern game, it just throws you straight into the action. So to start with, you kind of just fiddle about with the controls and see what you can do. It seems to act like a fairly typical twin-stick shooter. Based on the back of the box, this describes itself as a violent top-down rogue-lite space shoot-'em-up RPG. Now how accurate is that? Well, I guess we'll break it down. So to start with, violent. So I guess it is, but not much more violent than anything else that's available. You kill giant space monsters in a 2D cartoony setting, so if anything, it's slightly less violent than what you could expect from many other games today. Top down. Certainly, that's the viewpoint of the game. It kind of reminds me of Asteroids a little bit because of the space setting as well. But yep, that part's accurate. It is indeed top down. Rogue-Lite. So each level or stage is randomly generated. You pick one from a map screen that shows up with little stats and features that that particular level will have. Then once you choose which one you want to do and you enter it, it will be a procedurally generated area with random-ish enemies. It looks like the enemies will have a certain style depending on what level you choose. Seems to be based on what the boss of the level will be. But yes, that is some roguelike elements in the game. Space shoot 'em up. Well, it is in space, making the backdrop for every level black, which can be a bit bland sometimes. Every now and then these objects that are around change colour, but that's about it really. And shoot 'em up, I mean you do shoot, but it's not a shoot 'em up game in the traditional sense. Not every game where you shoot something makes it a shoot 'em up. And even then, this character that you start with doesn't shoot anything. He like throws javelins and harpoons. RPG. There is character progression. There's items to buy or unlock, or that can get dropped by monsters as well. But beyond having that kind of character progression, basically your stats can increase. There's not much more role-playing about it, so it's not really an RPG at all. So when it comes to violent top-down roguelite space shoot-'em-up RPG, just save your breath, it's a roguelike game. So it's tried to make itself sound interesting and unique, but in reality, it's fairly typical of what you've been finding in this generation of gaming, especially in regards to budget and indie titles. The controls themselves are fairly simple and easy to get used to, but not perfect. The left analog stick moves and the right analog stick aims, whilst the shoulder buttons shoot and use other items. It all generally works well enough, although the aiming can seem a bit off. I believe this game is on PC as well, so I imagine it feels a lot smoother with a mouse to aim rather than an analog stick. For some reason you can also use the circle button to give your ship a little speed boost, which is problematic because you need to be using both analog sticks and the shoulder buttons, so getting to the circle button doesn't always feel very comfortable, but at the same time you never need to do that because you can just press in the R3 button, that's the right analog stick, to do the boost anyway, so why even have circle as an option? Permadeath in the game is a problem. I know it's a standard feature for roguelike games, but this one is far too slow paced, with the progression very, very sluggish. It takes forever to get your character to a point where you have enough items and abilities to actually have fun and enjoy the levels and enjoy the challenge. So you find yourself dying in the earlier stages quite a lot when the game is at its most boring stage, and you'll find the reason you're dying is more down to impatience. This one seems to require you to put a lot of time in relation to other roguelike games just to really get going. So having to start over and over again every time you die results in you repeatedly playing these same few stages, which don't feel that different even with a degree of procedural generation going on. And in the end, you're just going to want to put the game down and not bother anymore because you're going to think it's boring. Visually, the graphics kind of remind me of old Flash games that you used to find online all the time. The enemies themselves are all aquatic creatures, but now in space and giant, with the bosses being the most interesting in design, and probably the most interesting part of the game, once you can actually effectively fight them. Prior to that point, they just have these giant life bars, and you'll get bored and get over their design pretty quickly. As you start to get used to the game, it does start to improve a little bit. First thing you need to do is learn how to use your harpoon. With this character that you start with anyway, you can charge up the harpoon and aim it at flashing enemy parts. Get the aim right, which isn't as easy as it sounds, and when you pull the harpoon out, it'll rip that part of the enemy off. This works on bosses as well, so that is kind of the strategy you need to employ in order to start doing larger amounts of damage to these giant life bars. It's a fairly cool feature and kind of the selling point of this game, and I'm guessing is what they were talking about when they describe it as violent. And there is a degree of satisfaction as you start pulling some of these bigger bosses apart and watching them shrink down, so this is actually a feature I quite like. The only time it's annoying is with some of the smaller standard enemies. A lot of the time I just give up trying to pull them apart because trying to get behind them or get to an angle where you can actually harpoon the flashing part becomes so tedious that you may as well just shoot them with your standard weapon until they die instead. As you kill these enemies and beat more levels, you'll acquire some credits, which is the currency in this game, which look just like Atari Pac-Man. Between levels you can spend these at a shop, which will give you two kinds of items. You can either buy a single-use item, like a health pack, or a landmine, or space mine in this case, or items that are essentially potions with temporary boosts, or equipable items, which will equip either to your ship or your weapon, which give a permanent passive upgrade to your character, from basic general things like just increasing your damage, to having your ship constantly spawn fireballs. You can equip up to 4 of these on your weapon and on your ship, giving a grand total of 8 passive effects you can have at any one time, but you do have an inventory you can access and swap them out whenever you want. So you can mix and match and try new things. Once you start acquiring and playing with these, the game becomes way more enjoyable and starts to show a lot of the potential it really has. Now things don't take forever and you can employ a bit more strategy, and enemies are no longer such a chore to deal with. Plus the fact that you just feel powerful, it can make for a pretty good experience. Problem with this game is it's all in reverse. Yes, you should feel more powerful and more capable as time goes on, that's the point of character progression, but this game starts off being very, very difficult with levels taking a long time. By the end of it, it's way easier, and you can smash through some bosses incredibly quickly. The challenge only occasionally balances out. With Blacksea Odyssey, you've got to put a lot of time and effort to make it get to the point that most games of this nature get to without the grind. But if you're willing to put the time in, unlock more weapons and characters, and get used to all the little nuances of this particular game, then you can squeeze some fun out of it.